They don't want the truth. They want people to come out and just tell their audience how great everything is and how the U.S. economy is fantastic and the guys at the Fed are geniuses and there's nothing to worry about. Everything is great. Just buy bonds, buy stocks, and don't worry. And I think part of it, too, is that I've been warning about the crisis that we're heading for a long time. And I guess sometimes they think, well, you've been saying this stuff for a while. And they forget how long I was warning about the 2008 financial crisis before that one finally hit. Now, I would admit that I've been warning about this one even longer, but it's going to be a much worse crisis. But I think that the financial collapse that I had been warning about for a decade is now much closer. Because we succeeded in kicking the can down the road for a decade, the crisis is now going to be much bigger than the one that I contemplated back then. I think the dollar's demise is going to be far greater. I think the probability of actual hyperinflation is higher now than it was then. So I think the stakes are higher. I think ultimately the profits that people will make betting against the dollar, betting on gold-related equities, and basically avoiding U.S. assets, I think the profits are going to be a lot bigger now as well, because it's a bigger bubble. A lot more air is going to come out. That means a lot more gain for the people who are properly positioned. And I think that the dollar is going to lose its status as the reserve currency. We're going to have a dollar crisis, and the dollar is going to lose a tremendous percentage of its value, much more so than other fiat currencies. And it's going to mean a complete collapse in the American standard of living. If you look at all of the debt that we're on the hook for, right, the unfunded liabilities, which would include commitments to pay Social Security benefits, Medicare benefits, pensions to government retirees. And then if you look at a lot of debt that the U.S. government has guaranteed, such as student loans or mortgages or things like that, and you try to ascribe some type of liability for that, because we know that some of the debts are going to go bad and the government is going to be on the hook based on its prior commitments. So if you actually take a fair accounting of the unfunded liabilities, there you're talking about like $150 trillion. So you're talking about a number that is more than 5 times greater than the official national debt that we're talking about when you're talking about this $26 trillion. But to put that 26 trillion in perspective, that's about 8 years of the current tax revenue, right? That's 8 years of taxation to repay that debt, which obviously shows you that the debt is completely unrepayable. There's no way to do that, because that's 8 years of tax revenue where the government spends nothing on anything else, which is impossible. The government can't spend zero in order to repay its debt. If you look at it as a percentage of GDP, right now we're at about 120% of GDP, the size of that debt. But of course, American taxpayers are also on the hook for the debts of the state and local governments. So when you add on those debts, I think the total claim on GDP by government on all levels is more like, I think, about 140%. But it's escalating quickly. I mean, think about that for a minute. This is how the U.S. government is running itself, not on taxation, but on debt. And of course, if interest rates went to something like 10%, then the government would have to spend more in interest than it collects in taxes, which obviously is impossible. But the U.S. government is insolvent. And if we ever had a spike in interest rates, we would have to default on the debt. And if we didn't default, we'd have massive or hyperinflation. So we have gone beyond the point of no return. The key is, when is the world going to wake up to the reality of American insolvency? Well, when you have hyperinflation, right, which is what you're describing, money is like a hot potato. I mean, nobody wants to hold on to it because it's going to lose value quickly. And so as soon as you get it, you got to turn around and spend it, because if you hold it too long, you won't be able to buy very much. So the velocity really picks up, and you have a real loss of confidence among the population in the future purchasing power of that medium of exchange. And that is going to happen. We have put ourselves into a position where ultimately the dollar is going to implode. Well, as I said, The way it was before COVID-19, at least in America, was not normal. And so we're not going to go back to that. I think we will go back to an actual normal, but that's a very, very deep depression from here. We have to go through a huge economic contraction to get back to actual normalcy. And the road between here and normalcy is a very treacherous one. And a lot of people are going to get wiped out, right? A lot of businesses are going to fail. A lot of people are going to lose money. All of that has to happen in order to get back to a normal economy. Now, nobody wants to go back to a normal economy. They want to go back to the bubble that we had before. I just don't think that's possible. I don't think that there's enough air to reflate that bubble. I think that the federal government is going to try, the Federal Reserve is going to try, but they will fail. Now, I thought they were going to fail last time, right? When I was forecasting the 2008 financial crisis before it happened, because I knew that it was going to happen, at the time, back when I wrote Crash Proof in 2006, and I said that when the real estate bubble popped, we would have a financial crisis. I said the government and the Fed would try to reflate the real estate bubble, reflate the stock market bubble by slashing interest rates and printing all this money and run trillion-dollar deficits. And, they did exactly what I forecast they would do to a problem that they didn't even know existed, but which I could see coming from a mile away. But my thought back then was that their attempt to reflate those bubbles would fail and that the dollar would crash before they can finish that mission. And then we would have an economic collapse. That's what I got wrong. They didn't just attempt to reflate the bubbles. They actually succeeded. And in fact, not only did they reflate the bubbles, they made them bigger than they were before. I underestimated the ability of the Fed to be able to do that because I probably overestimated the intelligence of the rest of the world to figure out what was going on. People seem to be under the impression that governments just have this pile of money and that, normally they're kind of stingy with it and they don't want to share it with the people. But then, when there's a crisis, there's an emergency, all of a sudden they become more generous with this money and they just dole it out. And, oh, this is great. The government's going to help us. Now we're going to get all this extra money and that's going to replace the money I'm no longer earning because I'm not working, I'm not productive. But it's okay. The government's just going to share this windfall with me. And this is all a bunch of nonsense. The government doesn't have anything, right? The government doesn't produce. They're not providing goods and services. All they do is print money, right? The central banks create money. And what money does, when you're talking about fiat money, right? Currency that's backed by nothing, just currency that central banks literally conjure out of thin air, right? The government cannot support the people. It's the other way around. The government only has the resources it takes from the people. The people support government. Government can't support the people.